Richard Young here from New Zealand Photography Workshops. Today we're going to look at printing in Lightroom using the Epson P800 printer. For me, the print has always been the final product in my photography, selling and exhibiting fine art prints. I also find it one of the most exciting parts of the photography process, having that final print in your hands. Although printing can be considered something of a dark art, so I've tried to simplify the printing process because printing at home or in the studio can offer a lot of convenience and a lot of creativity. And if you can unlock this process, it can also be a lot of fun. On this video, we're going to look at setting up a single print file in Lightroom. I used to use Photoshop for nearly all my printing work, and where Photoshop is a very powerful tool, it's also a lot more complex to use for print setup. We have to manually resize our images, we have to manually set up borders, we have to manually sharpen the images. When in Lightroom, we can automate a lot of this process. And you might think automating it might lose control over it, but Lightroom does actually a very good job of all of this. So that's why I use Lightroom for nearly all my printing work these days. And I very rarely go into Photoshop only for large or complex file setups. So let's jump into Lightroom and have a look at setting up a print file. What I'm going to take you through here is the setup of a single print file in the print module. So first of all, we'll just select the file we want and jump into the print module. So the layout of the print module, we've got our page set up on the left hand side and the option to build templates and to access our collections, the image in the center, and then all our layout settings on the right hand side. So first of all, we want to jump into our page setup. In the page setup, we can then select the printer we're going to print on. So I've got my Epson SureColor P800 selected here, and then we can go down to paper size and select the paper size we're going to print on. I'm going to print on an A2 sheet here. If I go into A2 sheets, there's a few different options. There's just a normal A2 sheet, but then we've got A2 on roll paper. So if I was printing on a roll paper rather than a sheet paper, I could use that option. And then I've got the A2 borderless option. So the P800 allows you to print borderless. We're not going to print borderless today, so we're just going to select the normal A2 sheet. Then we've got the orientation of the paper. This matters in some ways, but you can always rotate the image to fit the paper. I normally have my rotation sort of in a landscape orientation because I normally print landscape images. But if I had selected the other orientation, I can rotate the image to fit later on, so it doesn't matter too much. And the scale, I'm just going to leave at 100% there. Cool, so that's selected my paper size and it's dropped my image onto the paper. So I can now jump into the right hand side panels, and the best way to work with these is, like a lot of things in Lightroom really, is start from the top and work down. So first of all, we've got the option between a single image or a contact sheet, a picture package or a custom package. We're going to select the single image option. So then in the image settings panel, we've got a few different options here. So first of all, we've got zoom to fill. Okay, and if we select that, it's going to crop our image and essentially fill the page. In most scenarios, you don't want to select this because you've already cropped your image how you wanted it to be cropped. You might use this if you were doing some grid layout that you were wanting all the images to fit, but generally speaking, when you're doing a single image layout, you wouldn't select this option. Then we've got rotate to fit. As mentioned earlier, if my page orientation was the other way around, I can rotate the image to fit the page, but it's not going to make any difference on this image here because it's already the right orientation. Then we've got repeat one photo per page. Now this is only a useful option if you're building a multi-image layout and you want the same image multiple times on one page. Then we've got the option for a stroke border. Now, I don't normally use this, but you can create a border around your image if you want to. But if you're trying to create a white border, there's much better ways of doing that rather than on a stroke border. So we'll just take that back down and turn that off. So then we'll jump into the layout options. But before we do that, I'm actually going to skip down one panel and turn on the guides, because then you're going to be able to see how I build the layout a little bit easier. So we're going to select show guides, and we can put the rulers on, so that's actually showing our page size of our A2 sheet. We can turn on the page bleed. Now, as we're not printing borderless, there's a bleed on the page, and that's the area of the page that we can't print on. Then we can turn on our margins and gutters. Now, this is what we're going to set up in the layout options above. Then we can turn on image cells. So this is the cell the image is going to sit in. And then we can turn on our dimensions. Now, I find this dimensions tab really useful to have up. I personally don't normally have the rulers up. I just find I don't need them. I know the size of the page, so I don't need the rulers up. But this dimensions tab is really useful, as we'll see a bit later on. So now we can jump back up to the layout options. So first of all, we've got the ruler units. Now, I normally work in millimeters, just because it's a much finer measurement and it allows me a lot more accuracy, and I'm used to working in millimeters. And then we've got our margins. So the margins are what's around the outside of the page. So if we want to create a border around our image, this is where we jump in and create that border. Now, you might notice they're all set to 3mm at the moment. The reason they're set to 3mm is 3mm is the bleed of the page. So that's that non-printable area that's shown in the grey. So what we can do is we can increase these, and we can either drag them up and increase them, or we can just jump on there and we can enter a value. Now, I've decided I'm going to print this with a 50mm border around the outside of the image. I like quite a big border around my images, just because I think they look a lot more impressive on the page with a nice border around them. Like, it all depends how you're going to present the image. If you're going to frame it, you obviously need to select a big enough border for the framer to work with. If you're going to hand it over as a loose print, I think it's nice to have a bit of a border around the images. Like if you look at these images here, this has got about 50mm around it. Obviously this is a bit bigger print than what we're setting up here, but still having that border around the image just presents it nicely on the page. I'm going to put a 50mm border in there on the left hand side, and then I'm going to hit tab to get down to the right hand side, put a 50mm border, hit tab again, 50mm border at the top. And then if I just hit tab again, oops, sorry, I've turned off my panel. There you go. At the bottom, I'm actually going to go for a 60mm border. Now, when you're doing page layouts, you normally put a little bit more extra weight in the bottom underneath the image, because if you give it the same as the top and the sides, it will look like it's falling out of the bottom of the image. So you normally give it a little bit of extra size or a little bit of extra weight in the bottom. And this also gives you a bit of extra space to sign the image if you're going to sign it. Now you'll notice this image that I've got here, which is of a little rowan tree down in Central Otago that I took on one of our autumn workshops down there. It's actually in an 8:10 ratio. So this image cell that we've got here that it's sitting in, there's quite a bit of space either side of it. So it's not going to be an exact equal layout on the page. Now I'll just jump back up quickly to the image settings and select this zoom to fill option, and you'll now see this fills that exact space. So we've got 50mm all around that image, apart from the bottom where we've got 60mm. But I don't want to do that with this image, but it is an option if you're trying to get that equal border, and if it's just a little bit out, like, you can always zoom it in a little bit. So just jumping down a little bit further, we've then got our grid settings. I'm not going to go into these today because these are only if you're laying out multiple images on a page. And you'll notice as I turn those back off, it turns off the cell spacing because that's the spacing between the grid. Then we've got our cell size. So this cell size is actually at the moment being governed by all our borders up the top. And if we increase those borders, you'll see that cell size changes. So I'm just going to revert this back to 60 mil, and that's jumped back up. But if we want to make our cell size an exact size, what we could actually do is turn all our borders off. And if we wanted our image to be 400 millimeters in length and say 300 millimeters high, we can select that and we can input a manual cell size. So this is really useful if you're setting up an exact size print. Obviously that's not the exact ratios of this image again, and we could, if we wanted to, zoom it to fill. So as you can see in here, like setting up borders in Lightroom is really quick and really easy. So I'll just reset these borders to what I had them on. 50, oops, don't want 550, that would be quite a big border. And 60. Brilliant. So that's set up our borders as easy as that. So jump back down to the guides. We've already been through this, but if we want to get a clear look at the image, we can untick that show guides and see how it's going to look on the page. But I just normally leave my guides on. So then the page options. Now there's various options in here. I'm not going to look at these today. I very rarely use any of these options, but there's options to lay over a watermark and put page information and crop marks and stuff like that on the page. So then we're going to jump down to our print job settings. So now we're going to look at the print job settings. So these are basically the export settings for the file. This is the file we're basically going to export out of Lightroom and send to the printer. So first of all, up at the top, we've got the option of print to, and we can select printer or JPEG file. We obviously want to select printer in this case, but you could export to a JPEG file as well. There's the option for draft printing mode. I never use this. It's just for a low quality draft mode. If I'm going to print a file, I probably want to print it in full quality. Then we've got print resolution. Now, I don't know if you remember earlier on I said about ticking the dimensions box in the layout, which overlays this information here of the print size and also the PPI. Now this is very useful information. So it's got the current size we're printing this image, but it's also got the PPI. So the Epson P800, for example, prints at a native resolution of 360 PPI. Tick the print resolution box, that's going to disappear from up here. And we can then set our PPI. And as I just explained, for the Epson P800, this is 360, so we want to select 360 in this box. And this will upscale or downscale our image to that PPI to send it to the printer. We then come down to our print sharpening box. So all prints require sharpening. We're changing the size of the file and the different types of media. Some medias, like matte paper, require more sharpening than, say, a glossy paper. Now, this is not to be confused with the raw sharpening that's found in the development module, as a raw file needs both input sharpening and output sharpening, and this is the output sharpening for the print. So this looks quite basic, but there's actually a lot of advanced algorithms that go on behind to work out the amount of sharpening. And I just normally leave mine to standard and then select the paper type that I'm printing on. So I'm going to actually print on some cold press bright paper, so that's a matte paper. So I'm going to select the matte paper out of those two options. Now, if you've ever sharpened prints in Photoshop, you'll know it's very complex and it's a lot of trial and error, and also trying to get that sharpening amount right can be quite difficult. I found the sharpening in Lightroom very good, and 9 times out of 10 I'm happy with the results. Then we've got the option to tick the 16-bit output. If we select this 16-bit output, it's going to send the data to the printer as 16-bit data, not 8-bit data. So that's going to allow for better transitions. And then we come down to our color management section. I'm not going to go into this in depth because it's something I cover on my color management sessions and also my soft proofing. But the important things that we need to select in here are, first of all, the ICC profile. So at the moment it's selected to manage by printer. We can get the printer to manage our color management, but it doesn't do as good a job as managing it in Lightroom or, say, Photoshop. So we're actually better off managing it within the software, not within the print driver. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select the ICC profile for the paper we're printing on. So if I select this option, it comes up with a list of papers, which are ones that I commonly use, but we can also press Other, and it will come up with a list of all the ICC profiles installed on my computer. Now, if you've installed the Epson P800 driver, all these ICC profiles come installed with the driver. If you're using another paper type, you're either manually going to have to install the paper's ICC profile or make your own ICC profile. And by checking these boxes, they will then appear in the drop-down menu. So we're going to select the Epson Cold Press Bright paper. It then gives us the options of picking a perceptual or a relative rendering intent. Now, which one of these you pick is dependent on the image and depending how you want to handle those outer gamut colors. And I cover this in my soft proofing videos. For this image, I'm going to use a perceptual rendering intent. We've then got the print adjustment options. Now, I really do not recommend using this. If your prints are coming off too dark, too bright, or too contrasty, go and adjust them in the original print file, not in this print adjustment box. After we've set up all the options in the print job, we can then move on printing the image. Go over to the printer option, and then that will bring up the print driver options, and we can select the final options within there. Once we've pressed the printer button, we're now in the print driver settings, and this is where we set up the final print settings. Now, I'm running through this on a Mac machine, so the layout will be different if you're on a Windows machine. So first of all, we've got printer, so we want to make sure we've got our printer selected here. And then if we come down, and just one copy, then if we come down to where it says layout, there's a few different options in the drop down here. Now I'm just going to look at the main options here, well, the most important options. And they are, first of all, the color matching. If you remember, when we selected our color management within Lightroom over here, we chose to not manage the color management by the printer. We chose to manage it within Lightroom and apply the ICC profile in Lightroom. So we don't want to apply it again within the print dialog. Now, and you'll actually see by default here, this is all grayed out, and it won't let me select the Epson color controls. If, however, I just jump back out of here and I select manage by printer and then go to printer again and go to my color matching settings, I can now select all the Epson color controls. But we don't want to do that because we're going to manage it over here within Lightroom. So we'll go back, select our ICC profile, which is a cold press bright, and we'll come back down, we'll come back down to color matching, and that's all grayed out. So we can't select the Epson color controls. Now this is pretty foolproof on a Mac machine. On a Windows machine, it's a little more confusing, and you can actually select these Epson color controls while you've got a profile applied here. And if you do that, you apply the profile twice, so you'll be color managing twice. and you probably won't get the results you're after. So the next settings I want to look at is the print settings, and in this box here, this is where there are all the important settings to set up our paper type. So first of all, we've got the option between sheet feeder and front fine art feeder. Now the Epson P800 enables me to feed sheets in the top, in the sheet feeder, or through the front for fine art media. I'm going to be printing on cold press bright, which requires to be fed through the front fine art feeder. So I'm going to select that. I'm then going to come down to the media type, and you'll notice going down through these drop downs here, preloaded are all the different Epson papers. So I'm going to be printing on a fine art paper, and I'm going to be printing on the cold press bright. Now the important thing here is we are not selecting the color profile, the ICC profile. This is nothing to do with color management. We've already handled that over within Lightroom. This is simply telling the printer what paper we're going to print on, so it knows what ink to use, how much ink to apply, how thick the paper is. So it's a very important setting. And if you're not using one of these papers, you would find the nearest equivalent. And you'll see by selecting that, it's actually changed my ink there to matte black ink. If, however, I jump over to glossy, it's on photo black ink. So it's automatically going to select the right black ink there. Now, the color settings here are all grayed out because we're managing them over here within Lightroom, so there's no options to apply an ICC profile here. So then it comes down to print quality. You'll see by selecting this cold press bright, it's grayed out the first three options, based because they're not good enough quality. And I've got the option between super fine or super photo. Now, for textured fine art papers, you probably wouldn't ever see the difference on the super photo option. This is only relevant when you're printing on things like luster and glossy papers that can produce a lot more sharpness. But where we've got that textured surface, the super fine is fine, which is 1440 DPI, and that's DPI, dots per an inch. So that's the amount of dots per an inch the printer head's going to lay down on the paper, not to be confused with PPI, which we covered earlier. We've then got three tick box options here. So the first one is high speed. What this is going to do, this is going to print on both passes of the print head. So as it goes across to the left and as it comes across to the right, it's going to print in both directions. This is obviously going to about half the printing time. It does allow a little bit more room for error though, and you need to make sure that you've got your print head properly aligned if you're going to choose this option. Then there's the option to mirror the image. We obviously don't want to mirror the image, so we don't want to select that. And then there's the option for finest detail. Now you'd probably be tempted to press this box, but you probably actually don't want to. What this finest detail does, it prints the printer in 720 PPI mode. So if we were selecting the finest detail option, we would need to send the file to the printer in 720 PPI. But over here we've set our PPI to 360 PPI. Now you might think, well, why wouldn't we use that finest detail option and select 720 PPI in the print resolution? Well, if you remember from earlier, when we looked at this print size, and this is only an A2 print, remember, this isn't that big. That native resolution before we changed it was 442 PPI. So to up-res that to 720 PPI, it's going to be quite an increase. When actually bringing it down to 360 is fine. So this really is only an option if you are printing very, very small images and you want it extremely high detail. Otherwise, I would leave the finest detail box unchecked. We're now ready to print this image and we can press print. thought I'd just finish today's video talking about some paper choices. With so many different fine art papers available on the market today, you can see why paper choice can be quite confusing. But different papers can offer a unique way of expressing ourselves in our fine art prints. I'm going to talk you through 3 of the papers that I use for my own photography and why I choose these papers. The first one of these papers is Epson Premium Luster. I've long printed on luster paper and I love it for my landscape work, and most of these big prints that I've got up in the gallery in the past have been printed on luster paper. Luster paper offers a really high Dmax for really deep blacks and also a wide gamut for nice saturated colours, so it's very well suited to landscape work. The semi-gloss finish on it doesn't reflect like a full gloss, so it's very well suited for framing behind glass. Another one of my favourite Epson signature-worthy papers is Hot Press Natural, and I picked it for this photograph because the smooth surface of the hot press paper renders the detail in the landscape very well without adding any of that extra texture of a more textured fine art paper. And also the warm tones of the natural paper, as it's got no OBAs in it, really help render these lovely warm tones that are found in this image. And I really love this as a paper for landscape photography. For this long exposure image over Mount Taranaki, I decided to print this on Epson Cold Press Bright. The cold press fine art papers have a texture to them which I think really adds something to this slightly abstract image of Mount Taranaki, and that texture looks beautiful in these lovely transitions across the water. With OBAs in it, it's got a very bright white, and this really helps to bring out the bright tones in the front of the water here. If you're wanting to experiment with different paper types, a really good thing to do can be get a sample pack like this and print one image on a real mixture of different papers. You can then compare the different images side by side and see what paper works best for your photography. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it's shown you some of the power of printing in Lightroom, and also encourages you to get out and print some more of your work, because I think it's a very important part of the photography process. If you're looking to further expand your printing skills, I run a number of workshops on fine art printing. I run a series of one-day workshops in Wellington, Auckland and Christchurch that cover printing equipment, paper styles and choices, colour management, print size and sharpening, print-ready raw files, soft proofing in Lightroom, printing in Lightroom and printing problems. I also run an online portfolio masterclass workshop with Ken Wright. This is designed as a portfolio development workshop and is delivered over 6 modules online with a mixture of ebooks, videos and one-on-one tuition. It's designed to cover style and vision, expressive photography, processing workflow, processing with intent, fine art printing and displaying prints, with the end result of the workshop being a printed portfolio of 12 images.